good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are and where you're connecting to us from. We're really excited to have you here. My name's Brian. That's Kelsey. We're here
Yes.
today for our session for edWeb on effective social studies practices, thinking like a scholar. I'm a former classroom teacher from Cincinnati, Ohio. I currently am a learning designer at TCI and help with our curriculum and development as well as PD. And with me, I am super excited to have my colleague and my sidekick, Kelsey Moore. Kelsey, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Couldn't wait to find out what the second part of that was. Sidekick, I like it. I'm good for
Yeah,
that. But my name is Kelsey Moore, and I am also a former classroom teacher, and I am coming to you from California. And I live in Southern California. I've been with TCI for, lots of years now, and work as an account manager. So I get to work with districts all over the world. So I am so excited to be able to be here with Brian today. All right. If you have thought to yourself, man, I would love to know more about Brian Thomas.
no,
This is some information about him. I'm not going to read through it for you,
no,
but we'll leave it up here for a second. Hey, listen, it's fascinating. So check it out
yeah,
if you would like to know a little bit more about him. And we even have your Twitter information posted in the chat there so people can connect with you that
awesome.
way. All right.
That's great.
And with that, I think we're ready to jump in.
Awesome. Gang, we were really excited to go over this topic with you. It's so cool to have 650 or whatever it is social studies teachers joining. We were laughing before we started the live version here that social studies teachers were not normal. So it's good to have a group of nerds like us together in one place, and we can talk about social studies practices and thinking like a scholar. If you're not very familiar with TCI, which is who Kelsey and I work for, TCI stands for Teachers Curriculum Institute. We are the makers of what's called History Alive and Social Studies Alive and Geography Alive and Econ Alive. Basically, if it's alive in the title and a social science, that's who we are. And we're all former classroom teachers on our sales and our development team, and we make our content for teachers. What we're going to be doing today is sharing ideas. And so you'll get a firsthand opportunity to be able to see some strategies and practices together. But first, I think, Kelsey, we're going to do a little icebreaker question, right?
Great. I mean, here's the deal. Brian and I could talk about this all day long. I don't necessarily know if you want that for the whole day. But before we jump in, we want to hear from you. And so our question we were thinking about is what, as you're thinking about this, this new school year or any school year, what social studies skills do you want your students to develop throughout the year? Throw those in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. As you're thinking about, gosh, what are the things? I already see Grace is on top of it. Critical thinking, absolutely. Civics knowledge. Oh, critical thinking. That's going to be a popular one, which is absolutely the case. Brian, what are some of the ones that are popping up to you because they're coming in rapid fire over here?
Well, I was going to say, unfortunately, if I show that screen, it'll do like a fisheye effect.
Don't
So
do that. Don't
yeah.
do that. Well, I'll tell you some of the things that are coming in. We got the critical thinking, writing evidence. Let's see, analytical thinking, comparing and contrasting, media literacy, to think like a historian. Lots of inquiry that we see in here. Absolutely aware of bias, cause and effect, right? So many different social study skills.
Kelsey, I would call it a cornucopia of a veritable of skills that we have heard, and you're seeing fly across the chat, which is great, folks, because when you're teaching social studies, you've got to do two things, right? You've got to teach those skills, but you also have content, and we're going to give you some practical techniques today on how you can marry those two together, make your life a little bit more simple.
Yes, and I just have to read this from Marilyn. She said, kids typically like science more than social studies. I'd like to see kids excited about social studies. Yes, amen to that, right? That is why Brian and I work for TCI is because we want to see social studies come alive in the classroom. And I think
Absolutely.
some of the things that you're going to see today, you're going to see is just one way that we can do that, a strategy that we're going to give you today. So, Marilyn, I'm right there with you on that as well. All right, what are we going to cover today in our session? We are going to start with going over an overview. What is high quality instruction in social studies? What does that look like? And then, kind of to the TCI side of things, well, how does TCI approach those things? How do we cover? How are we a high quality instruction What do our materials look like? So we're going to talk about that, look at some powerful practices, and then we're going to jump in and actually do a couple lessons today. We're going to look
Yeah.
at a high school government lesson and also middle school geography, and then we'll debrief, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask some questions as well today. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great.
Awesome. Well, right now, one of the buzzwords I think that you've likely been hearing is high quality instruction, right? High
Mm,
quality instructional materials. And for social studies, when we look at it, there's a lot of things that are a part of high quality social studies instruction. But some of the big ones that we see, that we hear, are these ones that are on the screen. And my question for
yeah.
you is, which of these do you think these pieces are most challenging to meet in your classroom? Right? Looking at some of these things in here, what would you say? And you can just throw that in the chat as well. But of these things in here, what is hard to find, right? When you're looking for materials, which of these qualities would you say? Brian, I don't know for you when you look at this, and well, some of them are coming in, which I know you can't see, but
Yeah.
standards alignment.
Yeah, standards alignment, I think, but I mean, back in my classes in Ohio, I think one of the things that I found that was always took a lot of time on nights and weekends was trying to make sure that it was organized and that it was easy to be able to implement. Yeah, there's a lot of really good materials and resources that are out there, but if it's not easy to implement and use, that is problematic. So that was one that I tried to look at, and of course that predates HQIM, but it certainly matters, and I'm sure it still does to a lot of teachers. But what are they saying? What are their current
I
challenges?
know. Well, you're not alone in what you're saying because we absolutely see that in here. Some things that are well organized, right? Standards is one that comes up. Scaffolding is a big one. I see that
Mm,
lots of answers around scaffolding in here. Having students that are having a hard time comprehending the text, right? Support for
yeah.
ELs. Those are some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat. So I think right along the lines of what you're saying as well, and that was the case for me as well, Brian. Like having something that was easy to use, and here's the deal at TCI, right? Our hope and goal is to give teachers back their nights and their weekends and to say, we are going to give you some high quality instructional materials that you can use. So you don't have to spend all of that time to do that. You don't have to try to pull together these on your own, but we're going to give you something that's done. And there's a way that we do that, a couple different things that we do. But our approach at TCI is based on 5 well established theories. And actually, if you scan that QR code there, you can grab our toolkit, and I am going to throw our toolkit here in the chat as well. This is actually a PDF of it. So if you don't have your QR code to grab it, or your phone, I should say, to scan that QR code, you can grab that PDF that I just threw there in the chat. But our approach is that we want to give students of all abilities the experience to understand social studies concepts. These are some of the theories that our approach is based on, which I'm not going to go into depth on, but when we get into our lesson today, you'll see some of these in action. But check out that toolkit to see some more specifics on that. And the way that that approach plays out practically is in our strategies. All right. And we've got 6 strategies that we use that are based on some of those theories that every one of our TCI lessons is gonna pull on one of these strategies here. So visual discovery, experiential exercise, social studies skill builder, response group, writing for understanding, and problem solving group work. In that toolkit that I dropped in there, you can see a little bit more on each of these and what it looks like for your classroom. But today, we are really going to hone in on one of these, that third one there at the top, and the social studies skill builder, and look at what does that look
Kelsey,
like.
even before we talk a little bit more about the skill builder, um,
Yeah.
a lot of teachers here, you probably don't have TCI resources or anything like that. The benefit of this training that we're doing here is we're going to give you kind of the cookbook. That TCI approach and those strategies will essentially give you the design criteria that you can use when you're putting activities and lessons together with your students. So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy anything. That's great if you can, but a lot of people, you're looking for ways in which you can improve your current instructional resources, and so these strategies can definitely do that. It was certainly powerful for me as a teacher. But yeah, Kelsey, why don't you tell them a little bit about the skill builder, and then let's get into a lesson.
I know that's going to be the fun part, right? As we
Yeah.
get in, and we're going to dive into a couple of them today. But social studies skill builders are fast paced activities that are going to teach skills and content together. Right. And so there's a couple different steps. I think most of us are, when we think about skills based in the past, we think of, okay, we're going to do, some worksheets, we're going to do some reading, some writing, but how do we pull that all together? And we can do both of those at the same time, teach skills and then the content. And there's really five key steps, and I'll just overview them real quick, and then we're going to actually see what does that look like, right? So starting with, we're going to make sure we have the right sources, so primary and secondary sources, right, that are relevant. So we're going to start there. We're going to make sure that the task that we're going to do in the class is going to tap into multiple modalities, right? Wherever our students are coming from, we want to make sure that we reach them where they're at. We're going to then teach them the skill. We're going to model it. We're going to guide them through, which we'll see today, give them some immediate feedback, and then follow up by debriefing, right? And then connecting it to their lives. And Brian and I are going to do our best today to model all of those things today when we go through a couple different lessons.
Awesome. Now the fun part, we get to get into those lessons themselves. And the very first one that we're going to do is a high school example. So what I want you to do is I want you to think back to your freshman year of high school. Your freshman year of high school. What did you look like on picture day? I want you to just kind of go back in time, close your mind, eye, and kind of go back, drift back in that time, and think back to what you looked like on picture day your freshman year in high school. Now, I should never, and no teacher asks their students to do something they're not willing to do themselves. I will tell you that's when I once, Kelsey, had hair. I had the mullet, right? The party on the top, or actually the business on the top and the party in the back. I had the mullet because I graduated in 1988 from high school. So it would have been 85, would have been my freshman year. But that's kind of what I look like. Uh, the reason I'm asking you all to do that is just for the next little bit, I'm going to have you be stepping back into that role of a student. And I want you to experience a skill builder activity. Now, again, you may be an elementary teacher who's joined today, and we love having you here. You may be a middle school teacher who's joining, or a high school teacher. This strategy is going to work regardless of the grade level. The only difference is the age appropriateness of what you do with the students, and of course, the content that you're teaching. And certainly the skills are going to differ from lesson to lesson and from age group to age group. But the strategy, the pedagogy, the underpinning does not change. And that's why it's so powerful. So let's go back into high school, and you're going to be students in my government class. And we are going to be working on a lesson in which the essential question is, to what extent do the media influence your political views? This is a question that I want you as my students, that after a week or more, that you'd be able to come back to me and say, I've got all of this information that helps me to answer that question. Different perspectives, different evidence, all these different pieces that come together for me to be able to construct a claim to that question there. The activity that we are going to experience here is one in which, as a student, you're going to be working in groups to analyze and identify persuasive techniques used by presidential candidates. And how appropriate, because we are in the midst of a presidential campaign this year, this is very timely for us to be able to see and use. Now, I'm going to begin by having you, and Kelsey, I don't know if you've got the slide deck also open in another tab, but if you click access that text here, you can grab that link and drop it into the text. But folks, you can also scan this QR code. What I want you to do is I want you to either grab the link that's there, or if you scan that QR code, you will see these different persuasive techniques. And I'll just share with you quickly what's on the screen here in front of me. That as someone who consumes a lot of political media, social scientists have kind of identified these persuasive techniques that we oftentimes see: name calling, transfer, what they call the plain folks strategy, bandwagoning techniques, and testimonials. We also see glittering generalities and card stacking. And we have got some examples that are there for each of those. Kelsey, were you able to drop that link in there?
I was indeed. Yes, sir.
Awesome. So, what we're going to do in this activity is I want you to have those persuasive techniques handy because we're going to be looking at some primary sources in history and we're going to see if we can point out together as a group what was the persuasive technique that these political campaigns were employing. So, let's do one together. We're going to do one together and then I'm going to give you some time to be able to work through it on your own. So, this model practice that we're going to have on persuasive techniques, I'm going to use this poster that you see right here. This poster was from the 1952 presidential campaign of Adlai Stevenson. Now, I want you to study that campaign poster and I want you to look at it for about 30 seconds here. And then I want you to be looking at your persuasive techniques. Which of those persuasive techniques do you see evidence of in this primary source? And I want you to go ahead and pop that into the chat. As you see one of these techniques, go ahead and throw it in there. For example, I see, Kelsey, when I look at these persuasive techniques in here, I see a little bit of card stacking going on. That the party of Roosevelt has all these good things, and the party of Hoover represent all these bad things. That's a little bit of card stacking. So, what are the persuasive techniques? I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute while Kelsey sings for us, right? Kelsey, you're going to sing?
Oh,
No.
oh, Brian. I'm sorry. I'm still caught on the image of you with hair. So I haven't been able to quite move past that yet. Freshman Brian Thomas. So
There we go.
it's going to take
But
me a
as
second.
you
But
see some of the items that teachers throw in there, Kelsey, call them out to me.
yeah, I do. I see a couple ones. Maria says plain folks. Being able to see that in here, which, yeah, absolutely. I see Grace's transfer, Judith testimonial, Donna glittering generalities. Those are kind of the big ones that we have that are coming back up, and then a variety of all of those again.
Yeah, let's kind of take some of those in turn. So you said Maria said plain folks, is that correct?
Someone did.
Uh,
Yes, Maria did. I was like, who
okay.
said that? Yes,
So Maria, you
absolutely.
said plain folks, and when we look at this, yeah, if you kind of look at Adlai Stevenson and how he's nestled in between Roosevelt and Truman here, and all these just regular, you know, middle class folks over here who are just looking for higher wages and better homes and social security, it definitely fits into that plain folks strategy there. Love that. Um, Somebody else mentioned another one. I had said card stacking, but did
Yep.
anybody call out name calling?
Good question. Scrolling through lots of different people in here. I don't know if I see any
Yeah,
specific ones
I
that say name calling.
and so that's an example of one that we don't have really, direct evidence of. They say the party of Hoover, but they're not name calling anyone, right? So good on you that no one had put that in there. So in this way, when you see a primary source like this, it's not just one persuasive technique. So don't fall into the category of saying, well, it can only be one thing. Definitely can be several working in conjunction together at the same time. Now, what I'm going to do is just like we did here together, you're going to be given some time to look at a number of different political ads that are similar for campaigns, literally stretching from the late 19th century all the way to the late 20th century. I'm going to give you a chance to be able to look at those, and then we're going to come back here together. But what I'm going to do is, Kelsey, again, there's a link in my slide here on persuasive techniques, part one. And folks who don't want to wait for the link in chat, you can scan the QR code and you'll be able to access these campaign posters. Now, every one of these campaign posters that I have on my screen here, when you scan that, you'll view them like I see them right here, where they're flippable pages like that. So whether or not you want to just look at my screen or you want to look at that document, but also have access to those persuasive techniques, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you practice on your own, and you can pick any of the campaign posters, or if you can get through more than just one in 2 minutes time, then great. But I want you to look at least one campaign poster. I want you to call it out. So describe which campaign poster you're looking at. It could be McGovern, Garfield, Mondale, Reagan. It could be Dewey, FDR, Nixon. It could be McKinley. And what I want you to do is throw it into the chat, but then give us what is the persuasive technique that you see taking place. So let's take 2 minutes. And while those 2 minutes are going, as you get those ideas, you go ahead and pop them in there.
Perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to hear what people say as they drop it in.
Absolutely. Now, after you all take a little time to do this, I'm going to show you what this looks like in action with students too at the end of this, so that you get an idea of, all right, how does something like this actually work? What does it look like inside the classroom?
I'm going to tell you, Catherine didn't even need 2 minutes. She like jumped in right away. And we've got Mondale, which I think is the first one that you've got in there, their placard A,
Yeah.
name calling.
Yeah.
So right there at the get go.
All right, Catherine, extra credit opportunity. Catherine, that campaign poster is actually modeled after a very popular movie that came out around the same time. Do you know what movie that
Ooh,
was?
wow. We're going deep cut right here.
It is a deep cut. Did anybody throw in a guess yet?
Leslie says Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It is Raiders of the Lost Ark. You are
Oh
correct.
my goodness. Wow.
Yes, that is exactly
That's
right.
awesome. I can see it now. I can see like the Indiana Jones
Right. You see
text
the
even.
font, and of
I
course,
do.
all
I
the
see it.
faces, the same artwork that's used
Yeah.
there. Very, very clever.
Nice. That's
Yep.
good. All right.
What
We've
were
got a
some
lot of
other
them in here,
examples?
Brian. Yeah. Reagan for his, we've got glittering generalities.
Let's make America great again. Yeah. I mean,
I feel like I've heard that
everything.
somewhere.
Yeah. Very, very happy, very upbeat, glittering generalities. Nothing to worry about here. Good. Yep. Others?
McGovern testimonial.
Yeah, we got Carole King and Barbara Streisand and James Taylor. My sister's still upset with me. I lost her James Taylor 45 single somewhere. She let me borrow, and she will never
How
let me live this
dare
down. So,
you?
Gina, if you're watching this webinar, I don't have it. I'm telling you, I don't have this. But yeah, that one is absolutely a testimonial. That these folks are standing up for on behalf of George McGovern. But it wasn't just those three. We also see a very influential person when it comes to music in the late 19th and 20th, or not 19th, I'm sorry, late 20th and 21st century. And that's Quincy Jones, right? We see that, but not just Quincy Jones. Look underneath there at all the names that are in there: Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson, Julie Christie and Sally Kellerman, James Earl Jones. Who doesn't love listening to his voice? So if all these good people support McGovern, why can't you? Right? That is the whole idea behind the testimonial there. Kelsey, can you give me one more that we could point out?
Yes, I just have to say, I do love that one. I will say when I've done this with my students, they're like, "Who are any of those people?" I'm like,
Yes.
"How do you not know who James Earl Jones is?" And then I'm like, "The voice of Darth Vader," and they're like, "Oh, that's it. That's the only
Yeah.
one." So I just have to
They
say
might
that.
not know who Elliot Gould is, but they should know James Earl Jones.
Right?
I hope.
That's what I am saying. I'm like, "How?" Anyway,
Right.
so that's beside the point. Okay, back to it. We've got so many of them in here. Garfield. We've plain folk able to see that.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Here he is, Garfield, this who was a Civil War general from Ohio, but yet he was a plain folk farmer, just like a lot of people were at that time. Of course, we were starting to see a transition in society at that time away from agrarian and more to urbanization, but it was still the backbone of America were the farmers, honest and patriotic, and we see Garfield cutting down all these weeds of interests that are there. So, what were the persuasive techniques? The person that said that poster, what did they say, Kelsey?
Oh boy, where about Garfield?
Yeah, Garfield.
Oh yeah,
What
plain folk.
which Plain folk. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So plain folk. But I can make an argument that there's more than just plain folk. You have to look a little bit, in the detail that's there. But look at, he's using that side to cut down those the chaff, right? And that's falsehoods and fraud that I can see in there. So there's a little bit, maybe a little bit name calling. I don't know. Yeah. So my question then is this: you guys are doing fantastic. If these are all print ads, are these persuasive techniques still in use today with the kind of media that we have available? Of course, you know, gone is the day where print is as important as it was, let's say, at the time of FDR. But it's still there. Obviously, we see billboards and we see ads in magazines. So print is still used, but the more common types of outreach that campaigns use is through ads, right? Through TV, through web-based ads, and then through those types of interactions. Are those techniques, are they applicable to those forms of media? Well, let's try. Let's see. So we're going to do this one together. I'm going to play an ad right here, and this is probably one of the most iconic presidential ads that has ever been made. Um, you can go to a website like the Living Room Candidate and see really great advertisements that come from from presidential campaigns going all the way back into the 1950s. This one is probably at the top of the heap in terms of its impact. So let's take a look. And what I want you to do is I want you to use the chat, throw in what you see, but I want you to defend it. Don't just say, well, I think it's name calling. It's name calling because what? Or if you say it's transfer because. I'm more interested in the because. Why do you argue it is what it is? So here we go. Let me play the ad. All she was
Yep.
doing was counting the petals on the flower, and then there's a countdown. And there is some voiceover here, very ominous, deep sounding voice right here. But the end really will kind of capture it perfectly too. All right. Now, at that time in 1964, President Johnson had been in office for less than a year after Kennedy's assassination, and he was running against a Republican candidate named Barry Goldwater, who's from Arizona. So, which of the techniques did you see, just without even audio playing? Which of the techniques did you see in that advertisement right there? Throw it into the chat.
Yeah, we've got a couple different ones in here. Grace, was she the one earlier that said it first? Because I think we're back here again, but she says name calling because it plays on everyone's fears. There are not certainties.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's good evidence. There,
Let's see. Oh, sorry, go for it.
no, is there any others that have a because it's this because?
Yeah, Brian says implicit name calling, warmonger in parentheses there
Yep,
for
definitely. I
sure.
agree with that.
Uh, Judith transfer because they played on people's emotions. Leslie also said transfer the images of nuclear war strike fear into voters.
Mm,
We've got glittering generalities, child and commercial symbolic of the effect on America's future, right? Having a
yep,
kid there in there. So those are
perfect.
all some of the ones that we're reading. That. So I think we've got it. The group's got it.
They definitely do. They definitely do. So we could, that one's from 1964, but I could show an ad from, Vice President Harris's campaign or former President Trump's campaign or even an independent candidate campaign like Robert Kennedy, and we might have the same takeaway that it's going to fall into, maybe one or more of those buckets of persuasive techniques. And that is how we can use this as a consumer of politics. We can sit here and kind of know how it's been gamed out. Knowledge is power. And so we've got that skill now to be able to look at these things and know what kind of persuasive techniques are being utilized. Well, that's the goal in that lesson is the students are going to get up, and I'll show you right now. I actually had another video teed up, but without audio, it really doesn't make sense to show it. But this I can play here in the background so that you can actually see it. These are students that are in action, actually doing that very same lesson. Now, instead of them just looking at it electronically, the teacher takes those primary sources and puts them as stations around the room. And students get up out of their seat and they go with a partner, and they're working with the partner as they go through this, and they're talking, they're discussing, they're debating, they're reading, they're going back to their resources. They're getting a lot of positive redundancy through this. Oftentimes, we say of skills that repetition is the mother of skill, that students need plenty of chances to be able to go through an exercise before they can master it, and also need the feedback from a teacher along the way. And so one of the things, and I'll play that video again, you actually see him in just a very subtle way in the background playing the role of a facilitator. Our teacher here in the lower right hand corner being able to give immediate feedback for the students and be able to troubleshoot issues as they come up. When you're teaching a skills based lesson, that is such a critical component. Imagine learning how to add 2 plus 2 incorrectly. If you thought adding 2 plus 2 was 5 and no one ever corrected it, then it could lead to major issues for you down the road as a young adult, as an adult in life. If you learn a skill incorrectly and it's not corrected with immediate feedback, it could lead to some very some downsides for you. Well, that's true of our students in class as well. So that immediate feedback, it becomes important, and it can come in lots of different ways. It doesn't always have to come from a teacher. I'll show you another example here in just a moment where we can use a tool. A lot of teachers like things like Edpuzzle and Peardex and Nearpods out there. Those can also be really good ways to be able to help students be able to learn a skill and be able to get immediate feedback. So based on that, we're going to move on to our next example here, which would be the middle school lesson. But I want to give you another example, and this one we'll go through a little bit more quickly. And I just want to give you an idea of how the students could do it in a completely different, manner. So now this one is a middle school lesson, and it is a geography lesson. Now, very much like our high school programs, and like a lot of you, when you develop a lesson, we develop a lesson with the end in mind. So we have a question that we want them to answer. How can we describe the physical and human geography of Canada and the United States? We need to teach both content and skills. So how do we do that? We're going to do it through a video activity. Now, you might think of it almost like a Pear Deck or Nearpod type of activity, but we're going to have the students be watching some videos. They're going to analyze thematic maps, and then they're going to practice the skill of using coordinates. Kelsey, I cannot tell you, I taught 7th and 8th grade for 12 years, and I bet every year that I taught 8th grade U.S. history that my 7th graders would come to me and they would have forgotten how to do coordinates and be able to find the absolute location versus relative location by using coordinates. And it just drove me crazy until I started doing mapping labs with my students where they would really get the skill down. And that's exactly what this activity is all about. So I'll open this up for you, and we're going to view this together. Again, we're going to go through this a little bit more quickly. More than anything else, I just want to give you an idea of what's going to happen. First, we're going to give the students a purpose, a motivation for wanting to do this lesson. And the purpose or the motivation is that we're going to be playing a geocache game. So this video that would play for the students, it actually walks them through what is geocaching. And it's basically a big scavenger hunt game that, for geography nerds, where they use maps to be able to find hidden objects in locations. Well, in this activity, the students are going to be trying to locate different caches that have been virtually placed throughout Canada and the United States. Now, as a part of that, they're going to have some background information. So when you teach a skill builder lesson, as we saw with the government activity, and with this example here on geography, we need to give the students the content background. So we're going to give them text. This is where they're going to get their content from, or through, whoops, I didn't mean to close the actual slide deck itself, or through watching a video, which would also have that same information. But we also want to capture, do they understand what they just read? So we're going to have them challenged with some questions and get immediate feedback, like this one here, where we just need to know in the first part of the lesson, what do they know about Canada and the United States? Are they able to locate some major features? Like, for example, can they drag and drop where the Gulf of Mexico is, and where the Arctic Ocean is, where the Atlantic is, and where the Pacific is, and then get immediate feedback as they go through? Now, it doesn't have to be electronic. It could very much be something tactile, where the students come up to you and you're sharing a response in reply. But you want to make sure that you sprinkle out the content into bite-sized chunks that the students have to complete a challenge and you give feedback on before they move ahead. We've got to walk before we can run. And so after they get some background here, then we're ready to go ahead and start our hunt for caches. Now, our cache journey, our scavenger hunt, they're going to learn about a variety of different types of physical and human geographic features of Canada and the United States. And each of them will require the use of reading a special purpose map, or what geographers would call a thematic map. So, for example, if we were to go to physical features and the students watch a video and read a text, they're going to be reading all about how to use a physical feature map. And then when they go to answer their questions, we're going to start with simple questions, and then we're going to build the complex. Remember, we saw before with high quality instructional materials, you want to scaffold your instruction. Start simple, build the complex. That's kind of the idea behind Bruner's spiraled curriculum, which is really a hallmark to TCI resources. So we're going to start here with some challenge questions based on, all right, let's look at the map. Can you answer a question based off what you see on the map there? But we're going to build towards more challenging questions that are going to require them to put skills into use. Like, for example, here, if a geocache were located at 40 degrees north and 90 degrees west, the cache would be between blank and blank feet and elevation. So they're going to have to really analyze that map, use the ability to find latitude and longitude to be able to see, all right, based on the key, based on the coordinates, I know what the answer is. So a much more challenging question than the one that we saw, that we started with. And we continue to do that in a skills-based activity. You want to continue to, almost like Emeril Lagasse would say, you want to kick it up a notch. You want to keep kicking it up and add additional rigor until those students are doing some really higher order thinking exercises. And for us in this particular lesson, how we kick it up to its highest level is with something like this. A geocache has been hidden in a location that meets the following 3 criteria. It's located in Canada. It's located in a place that's between 5,000 and 10,000 feet in elevation. It's located less than 500 miles from the Pacific Ocean. You have 4 coordinates here, and we've got them on the map. Could you find which of those meet all 3 criteria? That will be the endpoint challenge for the students. If they can do this, then I know that they've learned physical features as a map and as a resource, because that's what all this criteria represents. But they also are using the skill of being able to accurately find the absolute location of a particular place. And that is a hallmark of every skills based lesson.
And I
So
love that
we
we're
could
talking
do,
about this. No,
yeah,
I love that we're talking about it, Brian, because that is, if we go back to that list that we had at the beginning and said, which is hard to find. So many teachers put in their scaffold, right?
yes,
Like, how do we do that? How do we find material? So the fact that this is here and it's done for me, right? Where it is, we are going to see those questions ramped up as we go, right? Is so huge for me as a teacher to have it and it's already done for me.
absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a good point for us to come back here now. And this is where I put those slides out of order. But I want to go back and I want to give you some tips on when you're doing a skills based lesson. What are some things that you really need to consider and think about? And this is also a good time if you joined late or didn't get a chance to be able to scan the QR code there to be able to get our document that has all of our skills and the design criteria. Because again, you may be looking for just ways in which you could adjust what your current instructional practices look like. We'll take these tips as a kind of a design process that you can implement. I would say that when you're doing a skills based lesson, always start with small groups, two or three. If you get too many, you got too many cooks in the kitchen. So if you've got 4 or 5 students, it's too easy for one student to really kind of be on the sideline. So keep those groups cozy. Um, Obviously, there may be times where you have to adjust it based upon the scenario that you're in. If a student is coming, back from an extended absence, they may have to work on their own, or if they're out for a particular time. If you're meeting with your students, maybe you're from an online school and your students always are meeting online synchronously or asynchronously, and you can't necessarily put them into groups. Obviously, there are a myriad of things that may take into account why that number may not be able to be 2 or 3, but for the most part, that's what you want to try to shoot for if you can. Have the group start with different skill challenges. You saw it kind of modeled there in that geography activity, but you also saw it modeled in the government activity, that we're going to do a series of challenges. And again, start simple and build to complex. If you're checking print work, if it were my class and my students were coming to me, I would have my Donald Duck stamp, because Donald Duck is the greatest cartoon character of all time. I would have my Donald Duck stamp at the ready so that when pairs came up to me, I could quickly look at it and stamp it to signify that they have it correct and that they are to continue. I'm not going to have them do 5, 6, 7 challenges in a row without some mediation. They've got to come to me. I want to be able to look at what they have there. Now, if for some reason I see that the same person is coming to me each time and it's the other person is just kind of sitting there hanging out in their pair, I will challenge my students. All right, you've got to alternate who comes to me to provide me feedback. So that way I'm ensuring a little bit of accountability there. And if you got a traffic jam, if you've got 13 eighth graders waiting for you to get feedback, that's probably not a great scenario there. You could actually be able to provide an alternate way to get feedback by just setting up a key somewhere in your room as a backup, a parachute, if you will. And I used to do it in my class where I would take the key for the lesson activity and I would tape it face down against one of the walls. And if I had a traffic jam of students that were coming to me, I would direct some students. All right, you can go over, you can look at the key quickly. If I see you there more than 30 seconds, I know something's up. I know something's up. And that way I'm able to keep the class moving pretty quickly through these. Stop when necessary. That's another tip that I would have. You don't feel obligated to complete all challenges. You all were the gifted class. We went through like 2 of those primary sources on the government lesson, and both Kelsey and I could already tell that you got it. You had it nailed down. It's not necessary then to have them do every primary source just so that they can prove that they have the skill down. Now, if there's content missing, of course, you may need to continue until all the content that's part of the standards that you're teaching is covered. But don't feel obligated to it just because that's how many you have. Once students have met the challenge, you could probably move ahead. And when you're ending, there's all different kinds of ways in which you can debrief. You could certainly debrief as a whole class. One of the things that I like to do is I like to do what we call a stock market activity, where a stock market, there's both buyers and sellers. Now, let's pretend that you had not gone through and looked at each one of those campaign posters. So maybe you didn't get to McGovern or McKinley or Reagan, but you did get to some of the others that were there. Well, you would be a buyer for those things that you didn't get a chance to look at, but a seller for the things that you did. And so I would have my students stand up at the end of class and they would be yelling out essentially, hey, I need something on Reagan, or I need something on McKinley. And somebody might say, yeah, I've got something on Reagan, but do you have something on McGovern? And they could then trade and talk a little bit about it and be able to quickly debrief it very, very quickly. So these are just some tips that you can consider as well when you're doing a skills-based lesson or activity like the one that you experienced here. Now, with that being said, I think we actually return to our criteria for that skill builder. And I think this is where you were going with that, Kelsey, and then we can kind of open it up for questions that they might have. So when we teach skills and content, we want to be able to select relevant primary and secondary sources. Did we see evidence of it in those lessons? Ensure the task allows the students to use multiple modalities. Did we see evidence of it? Did we teach the skill through modeling and guided practice? Did you see evidence of it? Do we give the students immediate feedback? Did you see evidence of it? Do you conduct a debrief and connect those concepts to students' lives? Did you see evidence of it? And hopefully, you can give a check mark to each of those things in the model lessons that you saw here today. But as you're looking at that list, think about your own instruction. Think about those skills based lessons that you have. If you're teaching third grade and you're teaching basic math skills with your students, that's a good point to look at your lesson plan and think about, all right, how can I introduce some tasks that give those students an opportunity to use multiple modalities? How can I make sure that I intervene and provide some guided, modeled, and then feedback throughout as the students are completing the challenges, and that we connect them together? So it doesn't matter if you're that third grade teacher or you're that fifth grade teacher, or you're a middle school teacher or a high school teacher. Teaching skills is something that we learn throughout our life. The content changes and the skills may be different from lesson to lesson, but those skills and content married together, they can be a very powerful practice and strategy inside your classroom. With that, I think we're ready for some questions, Kelsey.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to look at those today, and we've got a couple of them that were in here. I know Renee asked, what's the best, or is there another reliable place to find more campaign posters, like some of the ones that we showed today?
I'll tell you one that I really like to be able to use is the Library of Congress. That's a good place to be able to go to be able to find public domain items that can be free. The Library of Congress is one. Wikimedia Commons. Wikimedia Commons is another that has a lot of public domain, but also there might be. I'm trying to remember what the terminology is. It's common something. You have to give attribution essentially, but you don't have to pay for it. So it's free resources that you can view, usually JPEGs and audio and video clips. But Wikimedia Commons is another one that you could go to and be able to find a lot of primary source material that I would highly recommend as well.
Love that. And then there were these two kind of questions, and they go together. Sandra asked, what was the name of the website that we were kind of walking through people today? So talk about that. But then also Elizabeth said, and then this was, I believe, about the activity that we did on geography. Love this lesson. Are these types of activities available for all the other regions of the world? So I think those two kind of tie hand in hand, Brian.
Yeah, so and I'll be really quick about that because we were more focused on the strategy than on trying to necessarily sell you our programs and materials in that setting. What you saw was our curriculum. That what we create is based off of those strategies. That's what you saw an example of, were our slides that we use with students and what they would be doing in interactions. But again, there's lots of materials and resources out there that allow you to be able to put together similar kind of content as well. But certainly come to us if that's something that you're interested in. The other question that I think you had there, Kelsey, was someone wanted to know, um, they wanted to know other websites. Is that right?
No, no. So the question was, yeah, what website? So teachtci.com, right? But then also, did we cover in that platform other regions, right? We just
Oh,
looked at,
other regions.
uh,
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Our geography program, it covers all of the different geographic regions, and there's some sort of a lesson or activity. Again, for us as developers and teachers at TCI, when we create a program, we create a lesson first that always involves high quality instructional practices, and then build around it. So we try to do that in every lesson that we have.
yeah, love that. And that's it, Brian. Those were the questions that teachers asked, and that I think we were able to answer all of them.
Can you reflect on what you experienced and what you saw modeled today? Put your reflection in the chat if you could. All right, so then we'll
Absolutely.
come back here and we will close out. So um, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. There's feedback that I see now. The edWeb team put in a feedback form for you in the chat. So if you missed it, maybe you all could pop that in there again. Put in that feedback form. That way you can see it. There we go. Um, it's popped in there. Too many things to explore. Too little time, Miriam, I'm sure, because I know a lot of schools around my neck of the woods here in Cincinnati. They're already back in school. Some have been in school for a couple of weeks. Hard to believe. But wherever
Whew.
you are, whatever you're doing, don't lose the passion, and don't discount social studies instruction and its practices. What you do is so important, and we need in our society, we need people that are equipped with the skills to be good citizens, and that involves you. So great job. Thank you again, Kelsey. Thank you, and edweb team, thank you so much for allowing us to be able to host.
Absolutely. Everybody have a great rest of the day, and just keep doing what you're doing.